everyone, and welcome back to another episode here at the Damage Report under lockdown. Still very much quarantined here in LA, both myself and also joining me for the show, J.R. Jackson. How's it going?
Yo, what's going on? Hey, so you wouldn't know that lockdown and quarantine is still happening because it's not. But, I mean, now it's turned to kind of self-quarantine is what it is. I mean, those are some of the early terms when quarantine started. If you think you've been exposed, or if you've been in this area, if you've traveled this place, if you've been on this kind of airline, self-quarantine for 2 weeks. Everyone that's still in the house is now self-quarantine.
Yeah. You know, we have one of Arlene's friends traveled to Australia, and when you fly into Australia, they put you in a hotel for 2 weeks and you can't leave until you're done, and they test you while you're there. And she like live Instagrammed it, and like she was sort of losing her mind over the course of the day. It was pretty funny. It was pretty funny, but
so like,
I wonder, because as you said, most stuff has reopened. I haven't yet gone back to the gym. I don't really go out to stores. I'm curious, audience, am I being ridiculous? Like when we see people, you know, playing the slots at the Cosmo and stuff like that, if I don't even do these normal things, is that being too cautious? I wonder.
Yeah, it depends on what those normal things are, what time of day, who's there, all that stuff, you know, because I do some of those quote normal things, right? The couple of these stores have opened, so I've been to a few, but I only go when there's a few people there. If I see a line, you turn back out of there. I don't even stand in line because I was like, I understand.
Yeah. Well, so before we jump into the stories, thank you to everyone who's already joined us in the chat. Please hit the like button if you haven't already, and feel free to share the stream so more people know that this is actually active, because we cannot rely on YouTube to inform people. Welcome to everyone watching this on Twitch. I saw someone mentioned that John has gone green. A fan, I believe, sent in there Is No Planet B shirt. We don't sell it, but we do sell shirts at shoptyt.com, and maybe you can find something green, so go take a look. You might enjoy it. Anyway, we have a lot that we're going to be talking about through the course of this hour, from vaccines to new outbreaks, rallies and violence, and books and lawsuits. And so we've got a lot to get to, JR. Why don't we jump into it?
Ready.
Around the country, people are wondering, when is there going to be a coronavirus vaccine? And Trump also has it on his mind. Here's what he had to say about the medical experts that we can rely on as a country and what they've been able to accomplish historically.
Tremendous progress. I deal with these incredible scientists, doctors, very, very closely. I have great respect for their minds, and they have come up with things, and they've come up with many other cures and therapeutics over the years. These are the people, the best, the smartest, the most brilliant anywhere. And they've come up with the AIDS vaccine. They've come up with, or the AIDS, and as you know, there's various things, and now various companies are involved. But the therapeutic for AIDS was a death sentence, and now people live a life with a pill.
I don't want to get too on him, because obviously he says there's an AIDS vaccine. And no, there's not an AIDS vaccine or a cure or anything like that. People are still getting it, you know. But there are in therapeutic, there are good things. And I get that he sort of corrected himself. It was a stupid thing to say, but he did correct himself. I have other criticisms around this. But one thing that I did notice there, and it's not like anybody's going to be surprised to find out that Trump doesn't know what he's talking about, but like there's that stereotypical thing that like a kid would do if they have to talk about a book report and they haven't read the book, where they're like, well, you know, and there's various things and various companies. It's like you're talking, but you're not revealing anything. So anyway.
The only thing that's more annoying than a politician playing politician and not answering a question or dancing around it, and saying a lot without saying anything, that's a politician's like MO, is Trump trying to emulate that and then trying to dance around an issue, trying to say a lot without saying it. And then he reveals he doesn't know what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. And also that whatever he's referring to makes absolutely no sense. So, as you said, he tried to, try to cover it up a little bit. And he did sound like he was meandering, trying to figure, oh, man, how do I get out of this? I know I just said there's an AIDS vaccine, but I don't think, maybe it's some kind of secret. He's been having meetings with Kanye. Kanye said that Magic Johnson's got the cure.
Did he say that?
No, yeah, I think Kanye said that in like a lyric one time,
Hmm.
but basically like in a way saying like, hey, they're talking about HIV or AIDS, but look at Magic getting fat in his old age, like any other
Oh,
person that
jeez.
doesn't have it. So maybe he's been meeting with people. Maybe he knows something that we don't know,
Yeah,
John. Come on.
maybe. Maybe. Like I said, I don't want to focus too much on that. My bigger issue with this is Donald Trump pops up to say something about the coronavirus, which he has not talked about much very often. We've been very critical of him recently for that. Is it better or worse that he's not paying any attention to it now than that when he was? It was all nonsense and misinformation. I don't know. Take your pick. But information about the vaccine at this point, I would say, is right up there at the very top of what people need to know about, and what they need to know needs to be accurate. And so when he sits up there and says, we're going to have it very soon, that is not just, I know what they'd say. They'd say he's trying to reassure people. He's trying to make
Yeah.
people feel more confident. But here's the thing. We are a country that is way too comfortable with the coronavirus right now. Like, people think it's done. They're not taking it seriously. And if so many people are walking around thinking, oh, we're going to have a vaccine super soon, I don't need to worry about it, I don't need to do anything, I don't need to change anything, because Trump keeps saying we're going to have it very soon, that's not just, hey, it's the president, he's making us feel better. That is irresponsible to the point of people getting sick and potentially dying. And it is altering behavior. And so I'm going to let you get back in, JR, but I'm going to try to balance that misinformation with a little bit of accurate information about vaccines in just a second, but give me your thoughts.
No, yeah. So that's the idea. I'm trying to quell people's fears. He's been saying that since the beginning, and I guess there's a different school of thought from different approaches. Is if you inform people, they feel more comfortable because they have information and they can act accordingly. The other thought is hey, we can't give people information because they're gonna panic and freak out and wave their hands in the air and run around in the streets and go start killing themselves. No, like. Maybe some people would freak out that way. Maybe he's thinking personally, if he hears something about himself or hears about some kind of a virus or a sickness that's near him, maybe he freaks out and he's connecting that just that way. But a lot of people like to have control over their lives and have the information in order to have that control over their lives. And he somehow misses that there's this large segment of the population that would like that. There's people that are quarantined, don't want to be quarantined, of course, who does? But then they understand, hey, I'm more comfortable quarantined than I am wondering if I just got sick from this one interaction I had with someone else.
Yeah. So, I totally agree. Let me give you a little bit of information about vaccines, because look, I'm not trying to scare you, but I want you to be realistic, not you, JR, I mean everybody, about what is likely to happen. So at a base level, it typically takes 10 to 15 years to develop a vaccine. Creating, for instance, the HPV vaccine, that was a 15-year journey from key research findings back in the very beginning of the 90s until the vaccine was approved, initially for the prevention of cervical, vulvar, and vaginal cancers in 2006. The Ebola vaccine, which he mentions in that little speech, one of the fastest ever to be approved, took about 4 years from start to finish. Okay, and that is one that he cited there as evidence of how fast it can be, and apparently that was very fast. Now, with the entire world's attention on creating a coronavirus vaccine, and the nature of the coronavirus, which we'll get into, which might hypothetically make it a little bit easier to make a vaccine, it doesn't appear that it is going to take the 4 years. But it isn't going to take 4 months. It hasn't. We're past that at this point. And so that's why when he says very, very soon, that sort of vague, I would say purposefully dishonest language does a disservice to the struggle that international doctors are currently undergoing to get it out as fast as possible. And for the people who are going to have a very inaccurate idea of what the timeline actually looks like.
How often do you think, well, not even often, do you think at all Trump has gone and talked to any experts, any people that are part of developing a vaccine, any of these companies that have been granted this money to do so? If he's checked in, or even at least had an advisor, have someone who's in charge of this, check in, come back to him and find out about how long does this take so I can be informed enough to tell people how this would work.
Yeah.
You don't want to know the information. It's a simple question. You don't have to read, President. You don't have to read. Just ask someone else to do the research and come back to you and tell you, hey, this isn't going to be a 4-month process. And at least have that information. I don't think it's that hard to do. I wouldn't know any of this stuff either. I'm no vaccine expert. I'm not a scientist. I'm no pharmaceutical guy or whatever hell they do when they put this together. But I can ask a question. Hey, I'm about to talk to the American people. Can you tell me what the hell is going on so I don't sound like an idiot?
Yeah.
Because right now I'm uninformed. And it's okay to be uninformed. That's not your expertise. We have this assumption that the president is supposed to know everything. No, he's not. It's impossible. That's why you have this thing called a staff. That's why you got this thing called administration. That's why you have this thing called departments and officials. They know all that stuff of their own expertise, and they give you the information. You just regurgitate it. I know it's tough, but just this part should be pretty simple.
You are absolutely crazy, JR. I think it's more likely that he would just know detailed information about vaccines. That's more likely than him saying, hey, I don't know this. Can you fill me in? Like,
oh my
he's
God.
not going to do that. But it would be great to have a president that wants to do that. So some more information about vaccines. People need to understand that vaccines vary in how much immunity they provide. So there are some that are extremely effective, like the MMR vaccine. 1 dose is about 93% effective at preventing measles. 2 doses, which is the CDC recommendation, is about 97% effective. And so understand that even in this case, this is like the prototypical, very effective vaccine case, there is still a chance that hypothetically you could become infected with the thing that it's protecting you against. So bear that in mind. And that's the prototypical case, like the best. Others aren't as effective. The flu shot's effectiveness varies literally year to year because there are different strains, and the vaccines try to protect against the ones that are believed like they're going to be more common. During the last flu season, it was about 45% effective at preventing infections. The year before, it was just 29% effective. So understand that. And I will just throw out here, again, as I always do, the people who maybe now in the comments are like, why do you care about the 118,000 people that have died of coronavirus? That's just like 2 years of the flu. I will remind them, the flu is still killing people during the coronavirus pandemic. It hasn't gone away. It's not like, the viruses have to like rock, paper, scissors for access to our immune system. It's still there. And so bear that in mind. It is likely... So there are things about the coronavirus that apparently make it, like I said, from what I have read, a little bit easier to create a vaccine. And there are multiple different ways that they're trying to create a vaccine for this. Targeting things like the so-called spike protein that involves the way that it gets into the cells and all that. But there is also an international rush to produce it. And I can't speak for other countries, but if Trump, if like the CDC or the FDA or whoever it would be, we have a test, we have a possible vaccine. It's, it's like fine. It's like 25% effective or something like that. Is Trump going to accurately communicate that? Is he going to pump the brakes, or is he going to rush it out as fast as possible? And look, maybe even that would be helpful. Maybe it would be good to have that, as long as we understand it's not a total cure or a total prevention. But I don't trust him or the government while he's the head of it.
We already have our template for that, and we already have the answer. Number one, he'll say it's 100% effective. We saw how he was touting hydroxychloroquine when there was absolutely no clinical studies or any kind of thing to let him know that it's effective, that it's going to do something. But he's declared it for months. So we already know what he's going to do if there's a 25% effectiveness. He's not going to tell anyone. And number two, the reasons he won't is because it'll cause a panic. It'll cause people not to really believe in it. And then people will continue to stay away and not build up the economy so I can get reelected. That's the whole idea he's got. And he's already shown us that's going to be his approach. So why would he change now? There's absolutely no reason.
Yeah, 100%. So anyway, look, obviously everybody hopes that it gets out there as soon as possible. That's what we want. That's certainly what we need to save lives. But, we can't allow the desire for it to, cloud our mind or make us susceptible to misinformation. And so take these things with a grain of salt.
And let's with the opposition to things he says in quarantine and us libs, I'm going to say it like I've said every time. I can't wait to get back outside. I was outside yesterday. Yesterday I went to a store, and yesterday I went to the beach, and then I ran along the edge of the sand where there were fewer people. So yeah, I can't wait to get back there. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have gone on a run, but in doing so, you take precautions because I'm trying to keep track of what's happening and then work accordingly. I haven't run every day. In fact, I haven't run in 2 weeks. Partially because of it. So I just want to dispel the rumor that people who want to follow by the rules and make sure things don't happen worse aren't happy sitting up in the house all day. Come on.
Exactly. Jared, don't get down on yourself. You may have taken a little bit of time off the cardio, but you look great. You're doing fine.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
Donald Trump is super psyched, not just about getting back on the rally trail, but also having his massive convention later this year in Jacksonville. Not a digital thing, a physical convention where they're going to pack the halls with people from all around the country. And, you know, by that point, what are we going to have when it comes to coronavirus? At best, embers. You know, I guess that's the worst case scenario. Except that Jacksonville is having a bit of an issue recently, as NBC News has reported. The manager of Lynch's Irish Pub, Keith Doherty, told NBC affiliate WTLV of Jacksonville on Monday that 7 employees had tested positive for the virus as part of an outbreak he dates to June 6th, so about 2 weeks ago almost. One patron that night, Erica Crisp, said on Facebook that she had tested positive for COVID-19 and that 10 of her friends who were there with her the night of June 6th also have the virus. 4 other tests were outstanding. I think we can sort of guess where those might go. But it's not just Erica Crisp. Let's see, we have Kat Layton, who says 12 of 15 friends at Lynch's that night for a birthday celebration have also tested positive. Layton eventually told the local affiliate, "I do regret going out that night." And Erica Crisp said, "I feel like an idiot. I know that I've been so cautious up until now, and with Florida opening back up, it's kind of that whole out of sight, out of mind thing." And so they didn't just have sort of, you know, an employee got sick and some people got sick. It was huge percentages of entire parties at the bar at that time got sick. And we're being told not to worry about this sort of thing, that this is just, as I sort of jokingly alluded to, this is just embers. This is nothing. They're going to stamp it out. But it is blowing up in some of these areas that have reopened.
I'm wondering, you know, how each, because the reopening process, part of the criticism was making sure things are put in place. Not saying, hey, businesses no name businesses that we don't actually know, you guys should do this correctly and move on. And say we're going to reopen. Open safely, you guys. Make sure you do it right and move on. Some random business owner would be like, okay, thanks. I've been losing money. Let's reopen. And they don't care to open correctly. They don't care to hit certain guidelines. I don't know if it's specifically in this case, so I'm not trying to indict this particular location or this restaurant and those folks because I wasn't there. But I do know there's lax rules that go with this because many of the people that wanted to do it saw it as a hoax, saw it as not as big as it was, or even said, hey, you know what's more important to me than my employees or my patrons is making more money. All these different reasons for doing things irresponsibly just happen. And that's what's going to happen if you don't have a specific guideline, specific ways that people have to do it. And if they don't do it a certain way, you're going to make sure that they don't operate. I know that sounds like it's dictatorial or government overreach, but if the government has to answer for a spike in huge cases of people contracting it and then potentially dying of it, that's something else, another headache you have to deal with. Probably want to nip it in the bud first. I don't get that.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a mix. Like, certainly we know from early on there were bars that refused to close down initially in New York. They felt it was dictatorial or whatever, and there have been businesses that have resisted the orders. And in terms of people going to them, like someone in the comments just said, Jacksonville bars are absolutely packed recently. So you have people like Erica Crisp who said, you know, I've been cautious, I've been responsible, but it seems like things are getting better, so I'm going. So you have some people like that again, they might have been affected by sort of some of the ambient misinformation about the state of coronavirus right now. And then you have the people who, for all that they decry identity politics, their identity is coronavirus is a hoax. Okay, maybe it killed some people, but it's a hoax. We don't need to do anything about it. Like that they're actively attacking people for wearing masks or taking it seriously. And some of the bars are crowded with people like that. And I want you to think long and hard, are these the sort of people that if they have a bit of a cough are going to not go to the bar? No. And so, yeah, it's not just do you reopen or not? It's what does the reopening look like? And unfortunately, the position of the Republican Party now is anything done to protect people is a liberal plot. Or weakness. It's the destruction of masculinity in America. And so you could theoretically have some of these places open with social distancing, not packing them, wearing masks and things like that. But it's an all or nothing thing for some of these red states. And it's not a coincidence that some of the states that are blowing up the most right now with coronavirus, including Florida, are red states.
Yeah, and also red areas. So in Southern California, again, everyone thinks it's a liberal bastion. If you go to Orange County, if you go to anywhere else, it's a little more outskirt. You can find it within this in general. But the places where a lot more rules are being relaxed and people are held as accountable are many times red areas because they know the constituents there are less likely to really take it as seriously, maybe due to the fact that they're listening to the politicians that they trust versus the ones that they don't trust. So the politicians that they trust are telling them, get out there, it's okay, we need to bring the economy back. And then so those areas also accommodate those people. It's accommodating the thought processes for the people. There's some areas that opened and then they still had issues with making any money because people still didn't show up. Those areas, those are personal decisions. So it depends. And you have to see if it's convincing certain people to do things a certain way and they decided not to, this is the result of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, the bar did reopen. They closed to clean and then reopened. Look, I guess that's being responsible, but I don't look at that and think, oh, good, then it's done. Then we're good.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to that bar where 35 people just contracted it in one night. So also, cleaning...
Well, really fast. It's not just them. There were outbreaks at other bars in the area, too. I don't want to get too much on lynches specifically, but bars in Jacksonville. Bars. The country. It's still out there. That's really my point.
There's a restaurant bar right next to my place. I drive by it every day. It is now full. I don't know about the inside. I know that parking lot is full again. I was like, oh my God. And there's not a line out the door. So it's, again, this is right here. So it's sad that that's the approach we have to take, but it's kind of going to be that way. Now it's left for people to avoid it or take part.
Yeah. And, finally, just... we talked about in the beginning that the fact that the convention is going to be there, the Republican convention. I don't know what it's going to look like by that point. Still a few months away. But I do know that if you look back over the entirety of the pandemic so far in Florida, I would say that we are not in the best of times. That goes back to before April. That's like when we started lockdown. The first date is March 14th. And we are seeing way more cases in the last couple days than at any other point. We are not, and that's why I gotta show this graphic. We're not just talking about cases are going up there, Arizona, Texas. They are way higher than they were back when people were actually socially distancing. The time when we took it seriously, and the cases, look at there. You started to see it go up in April, in the beginning of April, and then it levels off really. And there's little spikes up and down, but nothing crazy. What were we doing then? We were staying at home. We were locked down. They got rid of that. Cases go up. You can't explain that, to give a Bill O'Reilly line, but we can explain it. It is I understand that Tucker Carlson, who makes way more money than me, spent night after night saying there's no scientific reason to believe that lockdowns work. I would point to this and say maybe there's something to being away from people with germs. Maybe that's better for the spread of disease than being right near them in a bar.
It's the testing, John. Because when you test, then suddenly people catch it.
Why? I don't understand why they infect the test with coronavirus. It's a horrible idea. And again, if it was just tests go up, cases go up, okay, that's not great news, but you sort of expect it, but hospitalizations are going up as well. The Saturday Trump rally in Tulsa is still days away as of when we're filming this, but the line has already formed, as if Trump is going to announce the next iPhone there. No, people are lining up again, despite the risk of coronavirus. And so reporters have been talking to them and finding out, what about all this conversation about the possibility that coronavirus could be spread? And they apparently say that they have no fear of the virus. I want to give you some specific quotes. One individual said, "Whether or not I get it, it doesn't bother me in the least. If I get it, I'll deal with it. If it takes me out, it's just going to make me mad that I can't vote for Trump in this coming election." And, just in case some of the slang is lost for some of our international viewers, he's saying if it kills him, his only regret will be that he doesn't get to vote for Trump in, I believe, a pretty solidly red state where his vote, won't be the deciding factor anyway, but he'll be dead.
So vote for Trump to help better his to help improve the. No, I'm not sure why he voted for Trump then. If after going to a Trump event that specifically knows that you can catch this, you die from it, and therefore you're like, I'll lay my life down for you and still not vote for you. Isn't that the whole point of supporting him?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. There's no need in going through the logic.
Because it's lacking. Yeah, like, I've been to a number of Bernie Sanders rallies in my life. I went to one not too long before the lockdowns, actually, before we knew how bad it was. If you told me, there's a lot of concern about meningitis spreading at the Bernie rally, do you know where I would be? At home. I wouldn't. I love Bernie. Don't need meningitis. Not interested in getting neurosyphilis to see my favorite politician. If AOC gave a speech and I was going to get syphilis if I went to it, now I understand there would have to be some other stuff that happened at the rally, but I'm not getting a fatal illness to listen to a politician, especially one who's clinging to the last vestiges of sanity.
It's crazy. I've never understood the energy. I've never been to a political rally. I've been to like the RNC and the DNCs multiple times, enough to see the atmosphere of people getting excited about a politician saying something. So I get it, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I'm definitely not thinking, oh man, I just got to be at this rally and I'm willing to die for it. I don't know if the excitement level ever gets that high. I've been to some incredible sporting events that I'm so glad I witnessed. I would skip all of them if it was packed full of people that potentially could spread this virus. I don't understand the draw of seeing a politician. Oh my God.
Well, I like the rallies. I have fun. Public Enemy performed at the last one I went to with Bernie. But I will grant you, commenters, I could have been more careful with my selection of virus. But anyway, and I understand, it's for some people, it's not for other people. And I get that, like, it's an event, but like fatal illness, I don't get it. Anyway, let's see if we can learn a little bit more from some of these individuals that were talked to by the news. Daryl Henry, who was camping out for the rally, said, one must fear not. We've paid enough sacrifices, we've taken enough precautions, and let's get back to it. Let's get back to opening our country. We're going to agree to disagree on how much of a sacrifice not going to a Trump rally is. But let's bear in mind, this is not like, I guess even school, or that the jobs need to like resume. This is a 100% optional rally. And I don't know if you saw this, JR. We talked about in the show yesterday. They're going to have overflow in, they're opening up a second convention center a couple blocks away for more than twice as many additional people who will be packing in and potentially getting exposed to coronavirus and won't even be at the rally. Trump isn't going to be there. You could go to a convention center in your city. Trump's not there either. Come to my house. We don't got Trump.
You can go down to the Staples Center in LA. We'll pack the house to watch on TV.
To watch
Trump
it on
over
TV.
in Tulsa.
And look, I like trying devil's advocate. I once went to UConn, and there was a year where both the men and women's basketball teams both won the national championship. And I remember watching the women's game on big screens in the basketball like arena. Yeah. Like they had a crowd there. Didn't catch anything fatal. And if I had heard that a particularly nasty cold was going around, I wouldn't have gone. But anyway, yeah.
And keeping it real, people like the atmosphere. It's the atmosphere of having camaraderie with folks that are cheering the same way. As you said, with the UConn example, there's plenty of sporting teams when their team is in the playoffs on the road and they pack their home arena to watch it, even though they're on the road. It makes sense because you're cheering with your fellow brother, your fellow fan. Mm-hmm. I get it, but what are we cheering for here? altogether. It's a perfect storm because of people's under quarantine. So, I mean,
Yeah.
they're ready to get out of the house and they're down to do it.
And look, let's just, I mean, we've said it before, we've identified it before. It is in many ways a death cult. Like the hydroxychloroquine thing. Like, if you can live through that as a Trump supporter, I bet every one of these people that's being interviewed by the news and is like bragging about their willingness to face death to see Trump, that isn't a cost that they're paying in their mind. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
They get to look loyal to the guy that demands loyalty above all else. They want this risk. It's ridiculous. Like, it's the identity thing. Like, they say, we hate people. Like, it's the identity as a Trump cultist. That is what drives them. And if that possibly takes them or their family out, if they end up bringing the virus back and it kills their mom, like, that's just a part of doing business as a part of this cult, unfortunately.
Yep. You can't be a fake Trump supporter. Real Trump supporters go all the way in. If you back out now, it's like they call dinos and rhinos for parties.
Yeah.
Same thing with this.
Yeah. Now, I do want to at least acknowledge that supposedly, according to the mayor's Facebook post, the mayor of Tulsa, the mayor said that the Trump campaign has indicated it will take health precautions at the rally. They say every attendee will have to pass a temperature check before they enter the facility. Every attendee will be provided with a mask. Every attendee will have access to hand sanitizer stations. So here's the thing. Let's say that all of that is true and they actually do that. Good. I'm glad that they're doing that. We are going to see the crowd, and I'm going to count how many people put on those masks that were given to them by Trump's campaign to wear. But Trump has taught them wearing a mask is weakness. And they didn't go there to cover up. They went there to scream and shout and spread germs. That's what they went for. So we'll see. Maybe they're being responsible. Maybe we will be shocked to find out that no coronavirus spreads there, but I sort of doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, the sound isn't going to carry as well from masks covering mouths of screaming people. Mm-hmm. Whenever, it's an applause line or something, like there are at these rallies. You got to make noise. And if your noise is, it's not gonna sound as good. So they're definitely gonna take it down to yell.
No. They didn't go to a crowd to scream racial slurs to have it be muffled by a bit of cloth. Anyway,
can I say a few of them? Should I say some of them behind a muffled mouth?
No, I don't think so. I want the show to remain on the air. You remember Dr. Fauci? You remember when the White House had doctors that they would occasionally talk to? Well, Dr. Fauci is still out there. He's apparently still talking, although not to Donald Trump. They apparently haven't met in literally weeks at this point because the pandemic's over, I guess. But Dr. Fauci was asked by the Daily Beast about the decision of the Trump campaign to start having rallies again. And he was asked, about the current state of coronavirus. And so I want to give you a couple of his quotes about this. So he said, "We are seeing infections to a greater degree than they had previously seen in certain states, including states in the Southwest and the South. I don't like to talk about a second wave right now because we haven't gotten out of our first wave." So that's a sobering assessment that and look, honestly, I talk about it as the fear of the second wave. But again, it didn't go away. It wasn't like it was just embers, like Trump always likes to say. And asked specifically about the rally, would he go? He says, no. I'm in a high-risk category. Personally, I would not. Of course not. Outside is better than inside. No crowd is better than crowd. And crowd is better than big crowd. It is really... I don't know that I could come up with a scenario that is a better... Like, if you're going to fill a room and try to spread coronavirus... This is how you would do it, and that's what Dr. Fauci is saying. Unfortunately, that message isn't going to be received by any of the people attending the rally because they have been taught to believe that Dr. Fauci is the medical deep state who's only there to undermine Trump.
Wonder who said something like that.
All of them? I don't know.
Laura Ingraham, she did.
Yeah, she did. And so they don't trust him, and they don't see him anyway. Again, like we've criticized, like the little conferences that they had for a solid 2 months or whatever. Like, those weren't an issue. The issue was Trump taking them over and spreading misinformation. Having a daily focus from the actual medical experts was a good thing. Dr. Fauci, I think, was a stabilizing force for a time. It's just that it was unfortunately co-opted and ruined by the presence of Donald Trump. Yeah.
Yeah. Fauci basically answered that question by saying, "How dare you ask me that question? Of course I'm not going.
No,
you kidding me? Get out of my face."
I have a feeling he wouldn't be going even if there wasn't coronavirus. But okay, so when you talk to Dr. Fauci, he expresses concerns about the rally and about the current spread. But the rest of the administration is trying to assure you that everything's fine. And Mike Pence has got, his op-ed is coming out soon saying there's not going to be a second wave. And so there's a bit of a disconnect between the medical professionals of the Trump administration and the others. And so Kayleigh McEnany, who's technically the press secretary, she was asked about this by Bill Hemmer.
See doctors Birx and Fauci anytime soon, because they seem to have disappeared.
Dr. Birx and Fauci are hard at work. I'm in task force with them. I'm constantly gathering the information from them, but we're moving forward on a number of issues, from policing while also keeping in mind COVID as we safely reopen the country.
Okay, but just to be clear on this, I read the Pence piece an hour ago. It'll be in the paper tomorrow morning, be online later tonight. Is the White House position that there will not be a second wave of COVID?
Our position is that we're monitoring it. We can't predict the future, but we think we're at a place where we have this under control, and we'll keep it under control. But we're monitoring each and every day to ensure that there is not a second wave anytime soon.
Let's hope that's the case. Kayleigh, thank you so much for your time.
Okay. It's not. I get this isn't a Kayleigh McEnany thing. It's a press secretary thing. They're not thinking, they're just saying what they're told to say. They're using talking points and all of that as we safely reopen. Like, again, the narrative of the safe reopen, like, we're seeing cases go up in multiple states. Like, it's such a ridiculous evasion. And why is Mike Pence, she's saying we can't say for sure if there will be, but we're trying to stop it. But Pence is saying there's not going to be a second wave. Kudlow was just was a couple days ago saying, no, of course there's not going to be a second wave. And notice that it's all of the non-doctors that are speaking with so much assurance about the current state of the pandemic and what's going to happen in the future as well.
Yeah, the heads of the most powerful country in the world are their basis for why there's not going to be a second wave when they haven't acknowledged the first wave is that we don't think so. Based off of what we assume, we're working to make sure. I can't tell you how, but I think that's the basis. No, there's no concrete evidence. There's no numbers. There's no we've been tracking this. There's no our approach is this. Therefore, we've deemed that this will get there. It's just we believe so. Mm-hmm. There's literally nothing behind it. There's a reason why they don't believe in science and figures and smart people. It's because those types of folks is too much work. Mm-hmm. They put in too much work, and they start ousting those people. Like, wait, you thought past a second grade level. You need to get the hell out of this room. So that's just the way it works. No, literally, she went on TV and told the country, we think it'll be okay. That's it. That's basically what she said. Mm-hmm. And except she said it for a minute rather than in 5 seconds. Yeah. That's what we're working with.
Well, and she said, we're watching it. Okay, but what are you doing? I mean, Trump is occasionally giving a speech about how there's a vaccine for AIDS. What are you actually doing? And there are minor things they could do to reassure me that they're still taking it seriously. I understand that Trump isn't going to make it a focus. He believes that it's hurting his reelection, and so he pivots to topics like his response to the protests, which is even worse for him. But how about this? When there's spikes in Texas and in Florida, why doesn't Trump give a speech encouraging these Republican governors to reinstitute at least some form of social distancing and mandatory mask wearing? Not lockdowns. I know they're not going to say that because they believe that that's trampling on the tree of liberty or whatever. But encourage them to have people at least wear masks. In Texas, where they are breaking records every day in hospitalizations, you don't need to wear a mask in grocery stores. Yeah. He could do the minimum to pretend that as they're watching it, as Kayleigh McEnany says, that they're doing anything in response. Right now, it's less watching like a protector and more watching like a pervy voyeur. It's like you like what you're seeing, and so you're just letting it continue. It's sick.
And you know what? And as things repeat themselves, this has always been the theme. We're getting a blueprint of how they take these things. So the first time he says, we've got 12 cases, however many he said, 15 cases, and soon it's going to be down to 0. That was his prediction before. And look what happened. Now the prediction, from Mike Pence being the new mouthpiece for what Trump is saying already, they're all saying Trumpisms anyway. So he went on and said, hey, you know what? We're not going to have a second wave. Oh, it's already over. You don't have to worry about this. You don't have to worry about that because I said so. We already know what happens when you make predictions. Yeah. You're wrong. So there's no reason to believe you this time. I'm not sure where their credibility has anything to stand on anymore.
Yeah. I'm still... I understand that even probably fans of the show are getting sick of me expressing the thought I'm about to. I am still astounded at how little people care about what has happened and what is continuing to happen. Like, when the 15 and it's going to be down to 0, like I could go back and see what we were saying at the time. I'm sure we were saying, well, that seems ridiculous. It's certainly not going to. But what if at that time you would turn to me and said, I think there's going to be 120,000 deaths in the next few months. Like, I would think you're insane. It's so much worse than we imagined. And the only thing more impressive than the massive rise in deaths is our ability to normalize it and pretend that nothing is happening.
Hey, and John, I know this is one of your main things that drives you. So just imagine. Remember, before this happened, there's no way anyone would imagine the world would basically have to go into lockdown over a pandemic, over a virus, right? So remember all the warnings that have been going on about global warming, the effects on crops, the effects on populations, the effects on migration, the effects on the storm patterns that destroy cities that usually wouldn't be destroyed, and we call it all fake and a fraud and a phony and driven by stupid scientists. So imagine if when those things begin to happen, our reaction. Again, it's another blueprint how we as Americans are going to approach a disaster that we've been warned about this time.
Exactly.
And no one seems to pay attention. So just imagine. Oh yeah, there's that whole hurricane coming at me. But Donald Trump said it's okay. He said this is not going to happen. That's a liberal hoax.
Yeah.
We're not approaching it right, bro, because we don't take anything seriously.
Yeah, the thing is, like we already know that there have been, natural disasters that have been far worse because of the impacts of climate change. And there's great progress. Young people movement's awesome. But the idea that, well, something is going to happen that'll be so terrible that it'll get through to people. I mean, what? Let's say a tsunami hits Florida and wipes out Miami. It's not going to happen. I don't think that's how weather works. But let's say that happened. Well, that would be a shock to the nation. Yeah, but for a month?
Yeah.
Maybe 2 months? Yep. Let's say 100,000 people died in Miami because of a tsunami or something. What, 6 months later, we're going to have passed a Green New Deal? Maybe. I don't know. After seeing the way we dealt with this pandemic,
exactly.
I don't know if there's anything. If Canada invaded, it would seem crazy, right? But for how long? How long until it's we'll get to it eventually.
Think about the way they talk about the effects of climate change. They joke and how people, look at this hair-pulling AOC. Food shortages, really, really AOC. Get out of here. Yeah,
they do.
She'd have been and then the same people would have said, really, AOC, quarantine, coronavirus, in the house for months, whatever.
God. Yeah, it's sad, but you are 100% right. During the last few weeks of protests, there have been multiple instances of violence. And if you only get your news from the mainstream media, especially if it's from Fox News, you probably believe that it's because of Antifa super soldiers that are rampaging across the country killing people. In reality, that's not really the way that it has shook out. Even in particular cases where initially violence, especially against police, were identified as being committed by leftists, very often turns out not to be the case. So I want to run you through a few instances of this. So first of all, we have an Air Force sergeant linked to an anti-government movement charged with murder and attempted murder on Tuesday in the shooting death of a federal security officer outside a courthouse in Oakland, California last month. So this is a story that developed over the course of the past few weeks with the initial shooting and then eventually a shootout with this individual when he was eventually tracked down. During that, this was on June 6th, Carrillo, the shooter, used his own blood to write boogaloo phrases on a vehicle he allegedly carjacked while trying to flee. So, as he was in fear of dying, he began scrawling boog and other quotes of the boogaloo pro-Civil War movement on the car. So, when those cops were shot at, one was killed and one was nearly killed, instantly the right wing blew up with, "The protesters are killing the cops." And you could see things, like this from thought leader on the right, Charlie Kirk. He had tweeted back on June 1st, Patrick Underwood was a black federal law enforcement officer. He was killed over the weekend as a result of the riots against racial injustice, which he puts in quotation marks because he doesn't believe that racism is a real thing. Says, did his life not matter too? And then he put his little thinking face that's supposed to stand in for actual thought. Well, I noticed, so when it came out that the guy who'd killed him was actually a right-winger that wants to start a civil war, and so he shot this cop to incite violence by the cops against protesters by making them think it was a protester. Back when it initially happened, Charlie Kirk was thinking about it, but he hasn't said anything since it came out that it was actually a right-winger, which is odd. He's on to other cases that he thinks proves his point. Like, think about how cowardly, how vapid, how vacant that position is. To point this out and to specifically say, did his life not matter? Well, I guess to Charlie Kirk it did matter, very briefly, until we found out what had actually happened, and now he doesn't care anymore.
It mattered to carry his message, and then he moves on to the next one. It's just how it works. You don't actually have to care about it. You just bring up a couple of trigger words, say those things to convince yourself that you've won an argument with someone about the topic, then move on and never come back to it. So every time you hear someone say Chicago, Detroit, you know what they're talking about, and they actually have no idea or investment in any of those cities or the reasons why the bad things that happen there are happening there. It's just a way to move on and convince themselves, I won, served those libs. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. And by the way, just one other detail in that particular case, that cop killer apparently used a ghost gun, a homemade AR-15 type rifle in these shootings. So bear that in mind. That's a story that we've talked about on TYT, the fact that they are able to, in some cases, even 3D print components for these untraceable assault rifles. Seems like sort of a big deal.
Hey, all I'm saying is, I've seen the president tweet out Antifa in all capitals with exclamation points to make sure we know who he thinks is doing the violence. Is he tweeting out the Boogaloo movement stuff? Is he tweeting that out? Is he talking about how it's disastrous and what they're doing to the police officers? Because I thought he cared about police officers' lives. I thought blue lives matter.
Yeah. You know, the thing is, I don't remember if it was on yesterday's show or if it was 2 days ago, but we got a super chat from someone saying, why aren't you talking about the cops that have been killed? And I said, look, any of this violence is terrible, but I understand that these protests draw in opportunistic, violent people. At the time, I didn't believe that it was likely that it was a right-winger that had done it, but I'm not going to use the limited time I have while this nationwide movement for substantive police reform is going on to stress something that could have just been opportunistic violence. Like, does that person now no longer care? I'm curious. Like, the right, Fox News, they were all over this thing. Do you think that they're talking about it? Like, did Tucker Carlson talk about it on his show yesterday? Like, oh my God, yeah, these right wingers, these militia guys, they're actually killing cops in the streets right now and trying to pin it on peaceful protesters. Is that a story that they're doing? Of course it's not. It's all misinformation.
That's the whole point, is to make sure you push that thing a certain way. It's maddening. Oh, I had a really good point about this, but continue on. Sorry.
I apologize. Feel free to jump in if you think of it. I want to give you a little bit more information on another case. So this is something that I believe we talked about yesterday. So we had, at a protest in Albuquerque, protester was shot by a counter-protester, who we knew at that time was a right-winger. So 39-year-old Scott Williams was shot several times in the torso in critical but stable condition, is still alive. Stephen Ray Baca was the individual who did the shooting. And generally, at least on TDR, we don't really show pictures of people who commit these sorts of violent acts. I don't want to glorify it or anything like that. But sometimes you do need a little bit of contextual information. So I guess we'll break that streak and we'll show you one picture of the shooter in this case. Oh, it's a picture he posted of him wearing a MAGA hat at a Trump rally. Because he's a Trump-loving militia member. That's who he is. And he put himself in a position where he could justify shooting an individual that thankfully is still alive. I've watched the video. It certainly looked like he had killed that guy. And again, so violence at the rallies. Someone was shot. Again, a right-winger. Just like in Seattle, the guy who says he's part of the KKK, it's not clear if he actually is. He tries to run down protesters, then shoots someone and walks away into the crowd. Right-winger. Why aren't they talking about this? How can you have months, or at least a month, of protest coverage focused exclusively on violence and never actually identify the people doing the violence, the right-wingers and the cops? It's all Antifa. I don't know if there's a single Antifa person at any of these protests. Certainly, no one in the DOJ, the FBI, has been able to track down a single one. But they just talk about Antifa. People are getting shot left and right. Cops are being killed by right-wingers, exactly as we said at the beginning. That they're going to infiltrate these things and they're going to try to pin acts of violence on the protesters. It is what we said at the beginning, and we've been seeing it in city after city.
They don't care. And there's the other part of it. So if you actually don't, well, first of all, they're fans of the violence. That's what they want, because it's getting to the end point of blaming it all on protesters, because that's the way they can operate. It's the only leg they can have to stand on is a false one. Number two, if you actually care about the violence, if you care about businesses being destroyed, if you care about police being harmed, the ones who aren't out there killing folks and having to go and do their job and stand out there and fight with people because they've been told to by their commanders, how about maybe the legislators? Maybe people who are in charge of changing the rules, maybe police chiefs, they should say, hey, everyone, we want peace. We're going to reform this whole situation. We're going to pass real laws, not the things like what Tim Scott is leading and what Trump signed with his executive order yesterday. We're going to do something for real. We're going to listen to you, and we're going to do something differently so that the violence can stop. If you want the violence to stop, do something about it. If you don't, then don't do anything about it. So you purposely miss the point of how you can end this. You can end it really easily. Just change the way you do things and tell the people, we're going to change the way we do things. We hear you. But you can't do that. So you obviously don't want anything to end.
Yeah, that executive order. I mean, we'll see what ends up happening with the bill, but...
Bill is the same thing as the executive order.
Exactly.
Same thing.
Exactly. And one other thing I wanted to focus on, we haven't talked much about it, was in the news yesterday, but the cops had accused Shake Shack employees of putting bleach in their shakes, and they were getting sick. There was an investigation. There was no evidence that actually happened.
But that'll stick. But it'll still stick.
Yeah, it'll stick. Yeah. This correction, maybe 1 in 100 people who have passed around the memes that, Antifa anarchists have been poisoning cops. No, it turned out that it didn't happen. And this is just the latest in the cops lying about violence towards them. With the concrete milkshakes, there was no evidence of that. They say this all the time. Today in the news, there's the, Officer Karen thing going around where she says that they delayed bringing out her McMuffin because she was a cop. I've waited for food at McDonald's, didn't know I was a cop until that moment. Yeah, she's worried. It's all misinformation.
She's worried because there's a large segment of the population that's very upset with police officers, and she's worried that the people are going to start retaliating. I understand that paranoia, because I get paranoid sometimes about things that I just assume might be happening around me. You know what I do? I avoid those situations. So if I'm a cop and I'm worried about McDonald's poisoning my McMuffin, I'm not going to effing McDonald's. I'm bringing my own lunch, I'm packing it and putting it in the back seat. That's what I'm doing. And maybe it's a hassle, but if I'm severely worried about it, I'm not going to put myself in that situation then.
Yeah, someone in the comments said, but didn't Trump say bleach was good for you? Exactly. Oh, yeah, no, and by the way, they tried to say in San Diego that the protesters were putting bleach in leaf blowers and blowing it towards the cops. There was no evidence of that either. They just lie. Jesus.
You mean chemical warfare? Maybe like tear gas, maybe?
Yeah, exactly, that they're using. There was a news report of one protester who was arrested for picking up and throwing a tear gas canister back at the cops and was charged with assault with a deadly weapon.
Oh.
What's like, what? When did it become deadly exactly? Anyway, and yeah, by the way, like, even watching the Officer Karen, like, if I see someone who's like, severely distraught, I'm, a progressive, I get sad or whatever. Let's say you are a cop who got it for the right reasons. You're one of those kids who were, when you were 8 and someone asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? You're like, I want to be a cop. I want to help people. Let's say you're one of those people. If the anti-cop sentiment is so bad that you can't order a McDouble, maybe it's time for reform. Maybe there's something to it.
Yep. It's the way the country's always been. You ignore and you push back on reality and actual change. And then you say it's BS. Mm-hmm. That's just the way we operate. We're too good to listen to you.
Donald Trump, not a fan of books, but it isn't often the case that he sues multiple authors in a short period of time, but that might indeed be happening for both Mary Trump, his niece, and John Bolton. There are a variety of legal threats and attempts to stop their upcoming books. With Mary Trump's Too Much and Never Enough, How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man, and John Bolton's The Room Where It Happened. Very different books, one about sort of the internal legal strategies and crimes of the Trump family, and the other, Trump's disagreements with Bolton about foreign policy, things like that. But we expect that the books are going to come out soon, and we already know that Mary Trump is expected, among other things, to talk about how when Trump's father got Alzheimer's, Trump dismissed and derided him as he began to decline, things like that. Look, JR, I don't know what's going to end up coming out in this book. I have very low expectations because she apparently hasn't been much involved in the family for a number of years. And I imagine if she had something super juicy, it probably would have come out before the, fourth year of the Trump presidency. What do you think? Is it likely that as an insider, she'll have something that makes the threat coming to her from Trump seem reasonable? That he would want to block something?
I think the fact that they're even discussing blocking it, because Trump was asking his attorneys, how do we do this to approach to maybe potentially sue my niece because of NDAs signed back in 2000 when they were fighting over the estate, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's the way it's gonna work, and I think it gives some validity to it, but I don't think the fact that it's coming out now, it's gonna be reality coupled with politics. Of course, things are gonna try and come out at the end of a presidency when it comes into election season. Same with Bolton's book. None of it's planned in a way to not be seen during an election season. That's their whole point. That's how they're going to sell it. So that's maybe the nefarious part, but I don't think that necessarily takes away from the potential facts, especially considering Trump is trying to stop all of them from ever happening. I think that there's validity to it. And Rudy Giuliani going on TV today or yesterday, whenever that was, definitely doesn't help.
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently both of the books are already in advance of being released, doing quite well. But what a weird situation that, Trump has apparently been stewing internally, according to the Daily Beast. Sources are saying, she signed an NDA, how could she reveal this stuff? And it turns out he's not wrong. She did sign an NDA back in 2001. Think about that. That, members of your family have to sign legal contracts to not discuss their relationships with you. That's the sort of thing where it should have one of two rational impacts on your typical Trump fan. One would be, what kind of sick family has to do this to hide God knows what? Or, forget what's being hidden, what sort of weird elitist can lock down his family members with legal threats like this and NDAs? No, rally attendee is having NDAs against their niece or anything like that. This is such a weird elitist rich person scheme to cook up, but neither of those things actually break through, and they just see him again. He's one of us, His niece has an NDA to not discuss what she knows about him. Normal person stuff.
Yeah, because there's a way around this. You can break NDAs in other ways. You can go on television. You can go on online news shows. You can interview. You can show all of your evidence and talk about it. You don't have to sell a book. Mm-hmm. You can go out and say, here's the papers. Here's the evidence. Here's a picture. Here's me with Donald. Here's this. You can show everybody everything. You can do it. You don't have to put it in a book and potentially get sued and potentially have the publication get held up and the publishers get in trouble. You don't have to do any of that stuff. Just go on any kind of thing and just tell us.
Yeah. So, look, it might be that she could end up being in some legal trouble because of the NDA. It's a little bit different situation with John Bolton. So they're apparently trying to sue to delay the publication of the book. And Trump has said so far this week that every conversation with him is highly confidential. So just a blanket thing, no one can say anything that Trump said to them as a general rule, which under Obama, Fox would have totally been fine with him saying that. But what they're doing when it comes to Bolton, because the book's publisher, Simon & Schuster, has already printed and distributed copies. They're already out there. And the lawsuit didn't name the publisher as a party. They apparently understand that there are certain constitutional and practical problems with trying to sue a publisher to stop a book coming out. Instead, the Justice Department has asked a judge to seize Mr. Bolton's proceeds from the book deal and to order him to try to persuade Simon & Schuster to pull back the book and dispose of copies until the review is completed. So they know that they can't stop the book from being published. What they want to do is put the squeeze on Bolton to get him, as the author, to block the book from coming out, which, again, I don't even know if he could necessarily do that, depending on what contract he has. But and it would be interesting, if Bolton does actually block it, then clearly he cares more about the proceeds than the information getting out there. That would look really bad for Bolton if this scheme ends up working.
And that's what they're testing him on. It's like, okay, because we can tell he could have said something before, as I just mentioned. And it's about making money off it and telling it. So if you want to just make your money and not tell us, let's see if you want to do it.
Yeah,
we'll test his I guess his I can't even say it necessarily, but his pride, his integrity,
maybe. And, with both these cases, I don't know what's going to be revealed. John Bolton could potentially, to the extent that you can trust anything that comes out of John Bolton's mouth, and I think there's very little you could. I mean, he's going to have been there for Trump's comments about Iran and other countries, the possible prospects of war. I mean, these are incredibly consequential things, and I remain incredibly worried about, like, if we didn't have the pandemic and we didn't have the protests, if 2020 had just rolled along, God only knows what we would currently be engaged with when it comes to Iran.
True.
Remember, it seems like a billion years ago, but that's how the year started, was a potential war with Iran. That is still a possibility, and John Bolton might be able to perhaps, shed a little bit of light on that at the very least.
One of the biggest scandals of the Trump administration has certainly been family separation. Now, many people watching this video are probably aware that the policy of family separation did not begin under President Trump, but you might not be aware of just how long that sort of policy and variations on it have been a part of American governance. And joining us now to break this down, author of the new book, Taking Children, A History of American Terror, we have the professor of women, gender, and sexuality studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, Laura Briggs. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Thanks for having me on, John.
Very glad to have you on. Incredibly important topic. Can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of this book?
Sure. Well, the book started because the Attorney General's office in the state of Washington asked me to talk about whether there had ever been in the history of the United States a policy of separating children from their parents for political ends. And I was like, yeah, I've been writing about that for years. We've been doing it since slavery times in the United States. And so I started working on this book. It started out as part of a brief to stop the Trump administration's policy in 2018.
Okay. And I know that the blurb of the book has a particularly chilling quote from Donald Trump. The quote is, "You have to take the children away." Now, of course, this book encompasses so much more than just the Trump administration. But just for a second, what do you think about the most recent few years of family separation? Is it different in any significant fashion from some of the other forms that this sort of policy has taken?
Sure. Well, so Trump was fond of saying that the Obama administration took children from their parents, which isn't actually true. However, we heard a lot under the Trump administration about the Flores Agreement, right? And that was supposed to guarantee that children were going to be treated humanely and decently in immigration detention. Well, the Flores Agreement had its genesis in the Reagan administration. The Reagan administration was the first to use putting children in immigration detention as a strategy to try to get people from trying to escape from political conditions that the U.S. had a role in creating in Central America. So in recent years, since 2019, so in 2018, we all knew about this policy. Lots of people went to demonstrations, opposed it, and so on. And a judge ordered the Trump administration to stop. But what the Stephen Miller wing of the Trump administration quickly understood is what previous presidents had long figured out, which is putting crying children in front of reporters and activists doesn't work out well. But if you say that their parents are criminals or neglectful, you can continue a policy that's supposed to be a deterrent to people who want to apply for asylum or refugee status in the United States by taking their children, and nobody will object as long as you say that they're criminals or neglecting their children.
Yeah, and you've already mentioned several different ways, stretching back literally hundreds of years, the pretexts that have been used for this sort of family separation. I'm sure you can expand on many of them, the race-based and class-based and all of that. And they do seem to always be presented in some form like what you just said, that this is not about separation or ruining a family or intimidating. This is about protecting the children. And I think that most Americans probably are primed to think of family separations in one form or another through that lens. Do you think that is sort of a fundamentally incorrect way to look at it? How else might it be framed, these sorts of policies?
Well, since the earliest days of the Republic, we've framed our intervention, our land grabs, our settler colonialism, always as in humanitarian interests, right? So U.S. empire is always in the best interests of Native people who are losing their land, and that's one of the first times that the U.S. used a policy of separating children, that Native kids didn't learn English, didn't have an opportunity to go to school, and so they were going to take children as very explicitly a strategy to end the Indian Wars in the 1880s and 1890s, and put them in boarding schools. And we know how that turned out. In 1929, the Merriam Report found that they were dying of disease in horrible numbers, that they were underfed, that most of them were illiterate. But we've always, whether it was the crack baby epidemic or saving impoverished kids from their bad, immoral welfare mothers, we've always taken children with the idea that it was in the children's best interest.
As you look back over the history of these sorts of policies and how they've evolved over time, and even just recently, the backlash to this policy that you saw, is there reason to believe that we might see less of this at some point? Are we seeing less? Is it becoming a little bit more difficult for the government to sell these sorts of interventions as necessary? Is there reason to be a little bit hopeful about the future that we might see an end to this sort of barbarism?
Well, unfortunately, the Trump administration actually accomplished its goal, which was effectively dismantling the asylum system, which is supported by U.S. and international law under cover of the COVID crisis. So since March 20th of this year, the Trump administration has been picking up anybody who sought to come to the United States and apply for refugee status and pushing them back across the border to Mexico or deporting them to El Salvador or Honduras and saying, you just can't come here because it's too dangerous. Initially, they said the U.S. was full, and then they said, we're just not going to let you in, and now it's nobody's going to be allowed to cross the border because we have a COVID crisis.
I just want to briefly note for the audience, it is interesting that they apparently acknowledge that the crisis continues, at least in this very minor area, if not in others.
That's right. Nurses can't get PPE. Nobody can get a COVID test. But if you want to get refugee or asylum status, there's a crisis.
Suddenly there's a pandemic. And I know that you've spoken about this sort of trend. You identify the emergency or invent an emergency, and then under those crisis conditions, you make the changes that you want. I know that you said that they got what they wanted out of this whole thing. Do you see that continuing so long as they have this pandemic? Are we likely to see it used behind the scenes, perhaps, by the Trump administration to continue the sorts of policies that they want?
So in this instance, the Trump administration was to dismantle the asylum system. But in other contexts, the U.S. state continues to separate families and children. We have in 50 states a system where if you are arrested, if you go to prison, if you test positive for drugs, then you're going to lose your children, or you're at high risk of losing your children into a foster care system. And as we look at the street protests calling for racial justice and freedom from violence against the police, we have to be really careful that people don't use the calls to defund the police to strengthen other kinds of state coercive systems, right? Every time I hear somebody say, oh, we're sending the police in all sorts of circumstances when we could send somebody else. Like, why don't we send a medical professional if somebody is overdosing from drugs? Or why don't we send a social worker to any number of these situations? And my heart just sinks because we know also what social workers do when they go to families who are in crisis. That we have a 100-year history of them taking children from impoverished families.
Well, that I have to admit that is both very interesting, and I hadn't thought about that as a potential consequence of shifting some of the responsibilities from police to these other the people that we think of as at least less likely to bring lethal force to bear in these interactions. But so I want to pursue that. If we do shift to sending, for instance, more social workers, is there something fundamental to the way they've been trained that leads to these separations? Is it a directive from up above? Basically, is there a way that we could reform that process to avoid some of the potential violence of the police, but make sure that we're not continuing this pattern of separating families needlessly and in a discriminatory fashion based on class or race?
Right. I think we have to rethink what we're doing with the child welfare system. You made reference to the problem that we talk a lot about saving children from difficult situations as a strategy for protecting the innocent children. And I think we need to have a serious conversation that I really only heard in this country for the first time in 2018, which is, should we be putting kids in foster care when the only crime that their family has committed is being poor? And so overwhelmingly, those are the reasons kids enter foster care. It's a housing crisis. It's a food crisis. We think of it as having something to do with violence or abuse, but that's a tiny minority of the cases in which we take children. And I think that just as we've started saying we need to really be paying attention to the conditions under which the police get involved in anything, we need to really look at the conditions under which the state gets involved in families and households.
You know, when I sort of the confluence of a few different things that we're talking about here, about the renewed national focus, at least over the past few years, of family separation, of the pandemic conditions that have already been tied into American immigration policy, if not explicitly, you're identifying how it is being used by the Trump administration, as well as the renewed focus on racial inequalities, longstanding structural racial inequalities. I also know that there is, at least on the horizon, the idea that hypothetically some sort of immigration reform could be coming. Considering all of that context, we don't know exactly how the election is going to shake out, but it looks like it's likely to be either Trump or Biden. What are your thoughts about the possibility of reform and considering those things, the welfare of children? How is that likely to affect them in the medium term?
Well, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that both Democratic and Republican administrations have thought that they knew best in terms of where families belong or whether it was okay to take children from families. So you talk about the COVID crisis. Here's a context. An Albuquerque hospital has been looking at the zip codes of mothers who are delivering. And if it matches them up with pueblos, if they're assumed to be from an indigenous community, they've been taking those newborns and keeping them away from the women who give birth to them until those mothers can be tested for COVID, on the theory that they might be infectious. And so what we have is unnecessary testing in pueblos where there isn't even a COVID hotspot. What we have again and again is the idea that white folks know better than people of color about how best to care for their communities and how best to care for their children.
Okay.
So,
well, feel free to continue.
And in terms of what can we expect from a Biden administration, certainly if we were to have a Biden administration, we can expect that the context would be better for immigrants and refugees than it currently is under the Trump administration, right? Trump ran on a policy of stopping immigrants at the border, even if his administration has been really explicit that they don't even believe that there's such a thing as refugees, and that the asylum system is just basically a way for illegal immigrants to slip into the country.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, the Biden administration was part of several of the initiatives in the Obama administration that were really bad for kids and immigrant and refugee kids. So the Alliance for Prosperity in the Northern Triangle, which takes in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, the countries from which there was a exodus of refugee children in 2014. Obama was part of pushing those kids out through an expedited removal process, which is to say they didn't get hearings on whether they had a reasonable fear of persecution if they returned to their countries. And we know, because people documented it, that some of those kids died when the Obama administration returned. We also know that in 2009, the State Department under Hillary Clinton wound up supporting a coup in Honduras that resulted in death squads in the streets again in Honduras. So the United States has played a significant role in the weakening of states and local governments throughout the Central America region that's allowed cartels to take control of local government, the police, and the military, which are the conditions under which people began to flee in 2014, continuing to the present.
Yeah. So not necessarily a very optimistic outlook, regardless of which way it goes. But we appreciate you, filling us in on some of what's likely to come. Laura Briggs, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, the book is Taking Children, A History of American Terror. And we very much appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.